Hi friends, host Eric here, talking with friends. This is the third take on this video. I've been having audio issues. Hopefully I won't this time. Um, Great comments by Trenton, and I want to go over this thing. I made a little bit of a roadmap here so I'd stay on track and be more efficient. And with the third take now, I get to use a more advanced document, I guess. I've done more stuff on it. So first of all, an overview. What happens in this video is Trenton's going to establish challenges to type and typology and typing. And they're basically a free will open system argument, and then a variability within individuals and types argument, and then practical harms of typology argument. Okay? I'm going to respond by pointing out finite time, pointing out the actual way shit goes down, by pointing out there's an intentional default by default, and by talking about relational interactions. And then Trenton expresses some stuff. Trenton's position, this is sort of going back and forth, but you might call this also Jordan Peterson's position, as far as I know it. I've not actually watched any videos where he's talked about it or anything. But he talks about what the Big Five does, empirics, why people prefer empirics, what that means, and what it means to have blind frames, or frames that you're not aware that you're displaying. And so, then I present modeling model. I say that I present the idea that the modeling model is to blame here, that it's a failure to account for the observer that's responsible for preferring Big Five, that there's a 4-variable minimum for instance of turn-based existence and 2 additional vectors minimum for progression of statuses over time, and that's just half the pie, the other half being infinitely complex and unable to be represented. And then briefly at the end I will slam IQ. Okay, first, Trenton's comment. I don't believe in types anymore. It's all just differing levels of Big Five characteristics. They're subject to change. I don't think a person is distinctively one of the 16 types. I've changed a lot, and mostly everything about myself by accepting I'm low in conscientiousness and working to fix it. I don't have issues with things I used to call weaknesses, an SE or anything like that. Types comes out of a mixture of IQ and Big Five characteristics, I believe, and it's reasonable. Don't jump on my case with arguments from metaphysical framing. I understand the mechanics of MBTI and sociology aren't contradictory or wrong. I'm saying they are just fractioning the big picture which is IQ plus Big Five characteristics. I think it'd fix a lot of issues with all types to acknowledge what specific things you are lacking in and should work on, but the thing about typing is it gives you a backdoor when you fail to do those things because they are part of your nature as X type. Know what I mean, Eric? You know what I mean. I've been getting this to voice. I've been meaning to get voice to this and haven't, so there are contradictions. That's not a contradictory. It's fine. Contradictions referring to them, but existence, but then saying they don't exist. Types do refer to individuals' characteristics at a moment in time, but they are subject to change, and type only reflect Big Five characteristics plus IQ. Okay, well, there's another argument here, which is type is just a reframing of Big Five characteristics. Basically, is his argument there. Okay, but that's not really. It's just not true. Okay, so here we go. Host Eric responds. Here's the response I wrote here. It's a reasonably quick way to do it. Forgot to do this. Alright. IQ is a silly measurement. And yes, I know what you mean and disagree strongly. I've heard many people make the argument that people use typology to excuse themselves for their own bullshit. I've heard many people make the argument, and I don't recall ever seeing anybody do it. It's a more attractive argument than it is representative of anything in reality. Regarding the rest, what cognitive functions allow is for individuals to understand that how their default attentional nature and approach necessitate a certain relationship with other attentional approaches. Type misses the point, it's true, in that it's not actually a meaningful rendering of an individual's distinction as an entity. Obviously, people are more complex than can be represented through static representations. That's why we're not digital files, we're human beings. But it misses the point. It misses the point far less than the Big Five does. The problem with the Big Five is it pretends as though attention isn't paid in finite units of time for express purposes. Nor does it distinguish between habits of values calculi that correlate very, very strongly with the attentional manner, but only very broadly, very weakly with Big Five characteristics. The best expression of type is really an expression of the finite set of attentional approaches that comprise human existence. One might say the cognitive functions explain the definitionally necessary relations of exclusivity, proportionality, and inverse proportionality manifest in any individual's expression of self at the moment. To live is to attend. Attendance includes manner of legitimization, which in turn explains why specific values correlate strongly with data of habitual attentional manner and barely at all with the big five. So, basically, cognitive functions say, if you're stirring potatoes right now, you are not also washing your hands. If you are doing both, and yes, it's true you can, you're doing neither effectively, and you'd be much more effective if you did one at a time. The Big Five says some people cook lots of different things, and some people stir a lot, and some people stir less. Well, duh. The question is why, and how do those differentiations relate to one another and manifest? That's what matters. The Big Five is the perfect example of the abject failure that plagues both sociology and psychology. Those who deal in either seem satisfied when they kick down open doors. That's exactly what the Big Five is, kicking down an open door. Now, I'll point out this. I'll bring Jordan Peterson into the mix here because I've heard him say in one of his videos one time, I haven't watched a lot of them, but I've seen a couple of things. Now, of course, it depends how you define it, but it turns out, once you get that definition down, that this and this. It doesn't work like that. It's not like, I mean, the defining part determines the data. It's not the other way around. The data is not something in need of some slight defining. The frame is the contents in every meaningful sense of the word. If you're telling me conscientiousness and openness are a real distinction between individual people, you're telling me that conscientiousness is something that is definable. And here's the thing, when you actually do try to define conscientiousness, you determine that it's divided of two distinct qualities. One is follow through, and the other is keep track of. Well, that's SE and SI. Now, conscientiousness does not draw that distinction. It contains both, even though they're totally different manners of attention. Which brings us to the question at the bottom, why don't we prefer the empirical justification for the Big Five over the reasoned justification for functions? And by the way, there are some empirics behind it, but I'm not even going to bother with them because they're totally unnecessary, and that would betray my central point here, which is empirics are one manner of substantiation only, and they don't even comprise a full manner of substantiation. They comprise sort of a prima facie necessity should the legitimacy of some basic claims be successfully challenged. Empirics are not the way that we ever learn or know anything important, ever. All good ideas are ideated before they're proven. So remember that we deduce things, we intuit things, we conclude things. Then you're just being a frame slave, is what I said. Okay. Hopefully that's all you missed on the audio there. So let's go down a bit further, though, here on this document. My point here on these blind frames is that if Trenton is arguing that it's empirically supported, so it's more valid, or if Jordan Peterson's arguing that, they're wrong. That's not a reason to validate the Big Five. Why? Well, I think the problem here is that a modeling model is to blame. The model of how to model. It's a failure to account for the observer. 4 variables minimum for instances of term-based existence. That's observer, subject, object, field. And that's for single instances. If you want to include progression of statuses over time, you need 2 additional vectors, minimum. What are those vectors? I'll get to that in a second. IQ, quick explanation of why IQ is dumb. IQ is stupid because it's like ADHD. It's a bunch of random sort of related things that people mush into a meaningless soup and say, the overall soup is more important than the actual expression of intelligence, which is never the soup as a whole. It's always individual components of it. So like I've got shitty visual spatial intelligence. I will probably score lower on an intelligence test than everybody else around talking with famous people. But I think it's also fair to say that in some manners of intelligence, I'd probably be more effective or display better anyway. So I don't know. Maybe if I scored super high on IQ tests, I would. I haven't taken one in ages. I don't know. But, or maybe I took one not that long ago. I don't remember. I'm sure I wouldn't score very high on them. And if I did, maybe I'd feel differently or something. But I don't know. IQ's stupid. It's a waste of time. It doesn't matter if you've got like better spatial intelligence than me and decent argumentational intelligence. I've got better argumentational intelligence than you and shitty spatial intelligence. That doesn't make you more intelligent. It means in one instance, your intelligence is going to serve you better. In another instance, my intelligence is going to serve me better. Or whatever. All right, questions. What argument is being made by the Big Five? Nothing. It's not doing anything. It's not useful for anything. So why should we prefer it? It's saying that that these are actual traits that people display. Well, those are values. Conscientiousness is a value. And openness is a value. Does it also express in terms of certain behavioral links? Sure. But then again, you're only talking about definitions. And since Big Five doesn't have any relational mechanics, their definitions are arbitrary. And they're only supported by the circular empirics that say, yep, we found what we were looking for. What is the warrant for the claim then that we prefer the Big Five? It's this empirics notion. But what argumentational paradigms are implicit in that? It's this idea that somehow empirical data ought to be considered more reliable than reasoning. And it's a failure to understand what substantiation actually does in argumentation, because those empirics don't substantiate anything. And yes, it's an argument. So if in fact the empirics make the data more reliable in which capacity, in which argument? Well, they're not making any argument. So it doesn't matter. The data is meaningless. Now, you might say, well, it's our job to interpret the data. Well, but there's nothing to interpret. It just says that here's 5 characteristics: introversion, extroversion, openness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and agreeableness. Okay, so why is that person more agreeable than this person? Well, why are these people disagreeable in the same way, and these people are agreeable in the same way? Why do these people seem so similar, and these people seem so similar, and these people seem... Answer some goddamn fucking questions that matter. Okay, which value is preferred when they conflict? This is the question people don't understand. They say, well, sometimes I prefer being authentic. I prefer what's more emotionally authentic. And sometimes I prefer what's more logically consistent. I'm both ways. Okay, but which do you prefer when they conflict? Consistently. And yes, of course people prefer things consistently when they conflict. So, for example, Trenton is not trying to argue that he feels strongly that he's right, and therefore I should give him credit for being right. In fact, he's doing the exact opposite. He's using FE to say, I'm positioning myself as the learner so that he manages perception successfully, and he's using TI trying to attack the cognitive function model on consistency, which I greatly appreciate, because I'm not emotionally attached to people not disagreeing with me at all, and I'm not emotionally attached even to the position I hold, but I am emotionally attached, in some sense, to getting to do my wheelhouse shit, which is point out when other people are wrong and why. That's right in my fucking wheelhouse. I'm ideating my nature, and I'm using my tool function, inverted thinking, to logically parse shit, definitionally reduce things to a pile of ashes before me. and successfully defend my positions from others doing the same. It's what almost all interesting communication is about. Is there any human manifestation not predicated on attendance? No. You cannot exist as a human being without attending in some fashion. So, this is important. There is a default of attendance. If we didn't default to one of the manners of attention, if we didn't default to ideating or checking for consistency or checking for other people's perceptions or checking against our own authenticity or remembering what's happened before and referring back to that, or checking what we know objectively to be rules implicit to the world, or just doing shit, or if we didn't default to one of those, then we default to choosing between them, and that manner of attention would be the default. Now, of course, that would be a horribly inefficient way to go about existing, in the same way as being ambidextrous and multilingual with no default would be. Like, every time you speak a word, you have to decide which language you're going to use. Every time you reach for a door, you got to decide which hand you're going to use. There's lots of shit we do on autopilot. Lots of forms of attention that are requiring almost no conscious attention. So I'm attending in some fashion to the door when I reach out with my hand to open it. I'm not attending to which hand I'm choosing. And that's important, because if I did, it would slow me down. I'd be less efficient than my peers. Every single door I approached in my life, I'd be a second or two less efficient. And that would add up. I don't want to have that consequence. I don't want to spend all my time deciding which hand to use to open doors. Even if I did want to, I couldn't. Why? Because that would require amazing keep track of itness and follow through, which is conscientiousness, which means I'd have to have great SI, which I don't. It's in the 4th slot, so I'm seeking it. And I'd have to have great SE, which I don't, because it's in my 8th slot in security function. Now, am I making excuses for that? No, I'm saying I accept that my nature is to prefer to ideate further. Thus, following through on a decision, which ends ideation, is not something that I feel good about. I accept that pulling the trigger is not always my best strong suit, because in the moment it's not my strong suit, because I'm interested in talking about it more first before we make a decision, because any is my nature. I accept that I'm not very good at understanding the fundamental equality and legitimacy of individual subjective feelings, because they always run afoul of my tool function. My default way is to parse away the particularist concerns so that we can analyze this thing in terms of its logical consistency for all parties universally. That's my default way. So when I'm compelled to deal with things with my own personal subjective feelings, I probably do a poor job of dealing with them. Not I'm excusing myself for doing a poor job. I'm just saying when I am aware of it, I should avoid making decisions when I'm feeling things a lot. Also, I have very little tolerance for other people using their feelings in places where I consider it inappropriate, such as making statements and arguments. Not that Trenton is doing that at all. He's straight up ENTP after all. Observations. 4 is the smallest number of variables for ontological modeling. Observer, subject, object, field comprise sufficient mechanics to descriptively model single instances of turn-based human experience only. The progression of statuses over time additionally requires the functions of drawing, distinction, and linkage. So now you've got 4 objects of analysis plus 2 functions in order to explain just the progression of statuses over time with no real-time or fluid and stuff going on. Instances of fluid or real-time human experiences become communicable only by rendering them into static representations. Thus, the distinction drawn between the two is an example itself of turn-based experience. And this gives people fits because they can't get outside the box. It doesn't matter. You don't need to get outside the box because, unlike what Trenton says in a later comment, you're not just saying your current truth. You're making an argument. You're affirming something. You're not saying your current truth. That's stupid. You're affirming something. It comes with baggage. Substantiation draws a distinction. It links. It displays blind frames. It constrains future arguments. It subjects the claimant to reciprocal burdens testing and requires the claimant to deal in binaries. You are not just saying your current truth. You're buying all of that when you make a claim. You're buying it all and swallowing it. and carrying it around in your stomach. I haven't forgotten that you made that claim. It's not your current truth. It might be your future wrongness, but it's your statement forever. You might retract it, you might disavow it, but you made it. So make good statements. Be right. It's not your current truth. It's part of your ontology. It's your metaphysical production of your identity, your entity. Own your goddamn words. Stand behind them or concede when they're wrong. That is something that Trenton is very capable of, and most people aren't. So good for you, Trenton. And good for you, viewer, for watching this video. If it was a little bit ranty and pedantic, I'm sorry. I try to work on the FE, but I get like, yeah. I saw this video that Jordan Peterson put up about how Ben Shapiro fails. I think that's what it's about. Seems what the title suggests. It's frustrating. It got like 150,000 views. I already made a video about how that guy fails, and I explain it exactly right. I'm sure Jordan Peterson does a fine job too, but I explain it perfectly. He fails because he's committing a non-stop reification fallacy, and he's doing that group shit that people do. Like, well, I'm on this team. This compelling need that people have to personify wrongness into a group of people they can make the enemy. That's a form of stupidity that harms everybody. And Jordan Peterson is right to scold Ben Shapiro in whatever fashion he did. I didn't watch it, and I'm right to scold him. And Ben Shapiro, man up, come over here. Jordan Peterson too. You like your big five? Man up, bring it. Bring me the person for whom you have the absolute most respect and for the most legitimacy in the world for their ideas. As far as I can tell, that's Jordan Peterson. Everybody I talk to mentions him and says, oh, he's so dreamy or whatever. He's wrong, just like Trenton is, if he believes in the big five over typing. And if he brings that weak ass shit in here, I'll do what I always do to it. I'll fucking light it on fire, piss on it, and throw it in the trash can. Remember, it's not him. He's making arguments like everybody else. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.